Okay.
And so, but they're just a bigger version of that.
Are they called Tractor Supply?
Mm-hmm.
That's their name.
Yes.
Pretty
They're
straightforward.
huge, yeah.
So tell me about your business. Well, I need a pizza.
All right. We're gonna call the meeting to order.
Yes.
Biscuits and gravy sauce.
We will, after a little bit of technical difficulty, we will call the Economic Development meeting to order. And we are going to do our agenda. We're going to move item 2 up to item 1 to facilitate our guests. And I will let Mark introduce it. Nick.
Okay.
God, and Lisa Powers over here. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you to our members from KEDA who are here today. Scott Bonjuki, our intern, had actually sent this document to KEDA this past Friday and had talked to them about the possibility of providing some input or some guidance on things we may want to consider for the economic development element, and also to sort of review the data that we were using and see if there's any other information out there that we ought to consider. This chapter currently is mostly what I would consider a light revision to the chapter, updating some of the numbers, our population and employment allocations, and then just sort of revising the language. I think some of the things that we had, or some of the elements seem to be very downtown focused as opposed to citywide focused, and so he wanted to kind of take things up a level and talk about citywide economic development policy. So really, we've given you a strike through and underline version of the changes that are proposed at this point in time. And if you look at those, as I mentioned, page 2 and 3, you see a lot of the talk of population allocations, showing that the city has sufficient population and employment capacity to accommodate its projected and allocated growth. But I think what this committee probably is most interested in providing input on are goals and policies that are going to help make Port Orchard more competitive and to encourage economic development within the city. And so that's where I'd like to get some guidance from this committee and some ideas that might be worth exploring as part of this element, so that we can take it to the Planning Commission for its initial review and public comment period. And so right now I think we have a pretty good place to start, but really I guess we're looking to see if there's anything missing from your perspective as elected officials or from the KEDA perspective. And also if you have any recommendations for things that Port Orchard isn't currently doing that we ought to prioritize as a goal within the plan. And so I'm not sure whether we want to go through this section by section and talk about it, or whether we want to have more of a broad discussion. I assume you three have had a chance to read this at this point.
Yes, I've read it, and I have a couple of questions. And my first question is public input on this, because when I went through it, I felt there were some things missing. I had ideas of my own. I didn't care for. I would modify some of the things that are in here. And so I was kind of more concerned right now about the process.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's why I was very pleased to see John. It's Kathy.
Kathy,
Correct. I was very pleased to see John and Kathy here for their input, because the glaring thing to me is it was focused on downtown, and it referred a lot to 2004, which I know is was our starting point for this document. But we hadn't done the McCormick Woods annexation, nor had we done the Bethel annexation. Mm-hmm. And so part of my concern is the process of how we're getting here. But again, I was pleased to see John and Kathy here this morning. And I don't know if we want to, as Nick had asked, do we want to go just initially section by section, or do we want an overall discussion?
And I think, and just a side note, as far as the outreach that we did do, we did do a survey. We had very high participation, higher than anything we had done on the comp plan this far. And so we brought that information to you previously, and a lot of what is in here is based on the feedback that we received.
Correct.
But in terms of any more in-depth economic development planning, that hasn't been done. It's really just been trying to figure out what needs to be addressed with the current plan and how to get this updated to meet our obligation. But we can go above and beyond that if it's the desire of the committee and council.
When was the survey conducted?
September, October, I believe. So fairly recently.
That was the one the students did?
This was one that my intern put together that followed along the same lines of what the students had done, but he put that together and I worked with them on developing it. And
How many respondents did you get?
100, and I think it was around 100, just over 100.
And was it general population or aimed at business community?
It was aimed at the business we specifically targeted the business community as well as the general. It was available to the general population, but we made an extra effort to get it to the business community.
Do you know who the respondents were? Did you?
We did not
What
capture-
demographic responded?
I'd have to grab the survey and actually look at it. I think we did ask some baseline questions to figure out who our respondents were, but we certainly don't have a list of who participated.
And so you don't know what percentage was business or residents?
We do. We did ask a question that was, are you a business owner? Do you live in the city? Do you work in the city?
Okay, so we have that
type of thing.
information.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're on the same timetable as everyone else, looking to
June
finalize.
2016, correct.
Okay. And what does the next year hold relative to milestones or periodic inputs from either elected officials or more from the community?
Well, the public participation plan that we have in place now calls for essentially a public outreach process and then presenting this to the Planning Commission for Planning Commission comment and public participation at the Planning Commission. There's talk of possibly creating a council committee that would work jointly with the Planning Commission on reviewing this so that both bodies are on the same page. Because I think a lot of times there's a disconnect between the planning commissioners and then it gets to council and they say, well, how did this come about? Because they weren't there for the discussion essentially. So that may change and this may actually go to a joint committee before going to a public hearing at the Planning Commission and then being recommended to council for acceptance. And I think that's probably a better way to go. But aside from that, that's the extent of what we have planned to present to the public.
And I would like to see if we do put together the ad hoc committee, that it also include perhaps yourself or Kathy or someone from your area and other citizens. Because there are particular people who have expertise in economic development and an interest in the city that I think could provide valuable input for us.
So are you talking an ad hoc committee just for the economic development element?
For the
or
entire
whole-
For
comprehensive
the
plan.
entire comp plan.
Yeah, because the county created what they call their internal review team.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're sitting on that now. The health department is,
Mhm.
Kitsap Transit.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah,
And this-
Edward at the
Source,
Transit
yeah.
Authority, yeah.
And this Economic Development Committee, comprised of council members and some staff, is in some respects kind of the standing committee, but ad hoc in nature to the comprehensive plan update with a focus on the economic development component.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
This committee also look at the land use element?
The land use, so the land use was done through a bigger process. That's where we did have the graduate students who prepared everything. That would go to the joint committee for further review. But we did have a whole lot more participation and review of that as a body.
So a fundamental question, because at the end of the day, I think economic development is about, the ultimate goal is a healthier community. It's about community development and the economic or commerce section of that, which is significant the way it influences it. But from a land use standpoint, you bring a good question up, Kathy. Do you see the existing land use policies, your existing portfolio of lands zoned as setting the parameters for what you want to do in your economic development, or do you see the economic development goals shaping the land use and modifying that and adjusting it?
Currently, the structure of the comprehensive plan as proposed is a community vision going down to what we're calling a local centers approach to planning, going to a land use element, and then breaking into economic development, parks, capital facilities. And so really it's a strategy of trying to create connections within the city of Port Orchard and figuring out how Port Orchard functions as a system. And so right now, for instance, we only have one commercial zone, and it's the same everywhere in the city. And so we want to, I think where this is going to lead is to multiple sub-area plans where we focus on economic development in these little sort of nodes within the city. And that's sort of the land use approach that we're taking from the work that's already been done to this point.
Okay. Well, it kind of brings up the issue that you and I talked about a number of months ago. Fred had brought up at a couple different council meetings, and that is, what do you do with some of the old and tired retail zone properties that need to be repurposed? And can you effectively repurpose them if you aren't open to new land use flexibility that can take an old retail big box and create a light manufacturing assembly opportunity or whatever it might be? So back to the question, is the plan going to restrict the way and where you cite commerce and economic activities, or are the goals and objectives of shaping the type of jobs you want in an employment center going to start to mold the revised land use component of the plan?
Yeah, I think the goal is to try to focus on these nodes, which we've identified, these 10 centers, and to figure out what each of these individual centers needs to function and to be more vibrant. And so it's breaking it into bite-sized chunks and then trying to figure out how to invest in terms of infrastructure dollars into those areas.
That's not really detailed in here or talked about much?
Not in this element.
So,
But it needs to be. Because
Yeah,
if you're
yeah.
gonna say, this is where economic development is in these 10 areas, then you need to reference that.
so here's a kind of a classic chicken and egg. You've got your employment numbers broken out. You've got them, kind of vary from retail down through wholesale trade and between government. And 1 out of 5 jobs, 19%. Construction, 2%. Manufacturing, very, very low at 1%. So the question I would have, if Port Orchard over time sees itself as growing in its primary job activity, which includes manufacturing, and it's only 1% today, if over the next 20-year horizon we want to take that to 5% or whatever, then the question is, so where does it go? In which center for growth does it go? Do we have enough land zone to accommodate that type of, do we need to expand the Port Orchard Business Park? Do we need to create another one? Do we need to repurpose some old retail that could be a light manufacturing purpose? But that really depends upon what type of jobs you want in that employment center over a 20-year horizon. I mean, your government is your anchor in some respects relative to the type of job that is fairly stable, solid pay, benefits, a real anchor in the community. Retail can ebb and flow, maybe a little bit more. The question is, does Port Orchard want to try and create another anchor sector? And how does that fit into the community around you, Kitsap County in general, into Pierce Peninsula, over on the I-5 corridor? What's your role in looking at that? And do you want to try and influence the type of jobs you have in that employment center? I'm not here to tell you do one way or another, but I think it's a question to put on the table.
Yeah, I agree, and there's a perfect example of that we're reviewing right now. We did get a application for a microbrewery, and brewing is considered an industrial use in the city and is not currently, as far as we can tell, permitted except with an expensive conditional use permit in the city. And so certain types of manufacturing that may be compatible with these areas, that's one of the goals we've identified, is figuring out how to allow light industrial or clean industrial type uses to be mixed in commercial areas. And ultimately I think where this leads is, what are the barriers within our development regulations to allowing these things, and then what goals would we need to put in our comprehensive plan to give ourselves the direction to actually make those changes to the development regulations.
Well, as an employment center, if you look at it as a percent of your, or compared to your population, which today is what, 11.5, 12?
13,150.
13,150, and jobs are 6,800? That would denote an inward bound employment community. You're employing people from more than what your general population would have. If you look at the demographics, you normally have about of your employment in the work between 20 and 60 or thereabouts.
But in reality, we export a lot of our workers.
Yeah.
So we're obviously also importing a lot of workers then
Yes.
also. Because I would say that we export a lot of workers to the Department of Defense. And, and again, I can't think of just South Kitsap, I'm trying to think of Port Orchard, but
Right.
I believe we do, and I believe that we export a lot to Boeing and Microsoft and Amazon.
You do, but at that percentage, 60.
That tells us that we
60%
also
plus.
import a lot.
There's more coming in on that population base than is going out in some respects, but Kitsap County overall, with a average employment base of about 100,000 of a 260,000 population, there's about, depending on whose numbers you look at, there's 35 to 40,000 of that base that go out every day, but about 10 plus come in. But we are a net exporter outside of the county, primarily into the I-5 corridor. But Port Orchard seems to be, at the end of the day, more of a net importer than exporter, just on
But I
population
think
numbers.
it's the type of jobs, though, that's the issue for us.
Bingo. What kind of
You know,
jobs do you
We're
want?
exporting workers to higher paying jobs and importing workers to lower paying jobs. And, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Do we want, whether it's SKIA or the industrial park or repurpose the Kmart building or whatever into some sort of semiconductor, light manufacturing, or something else that's going to pay $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 for some high-tech workers? Or are we looking at, building the Bethel corridor to be primarily a retail service? It usually pays part-timers, $20 an hour. It's a big question. And right now, you're right. I mean, if we were to focus on Bethel corridor, there's nothing in there that's going to be manufacturing. It's all service industry and retail, and those tend not to be very high-paying jobs.
Well, and I think the vision for Bethel, at least what I hear a lot from council, is they see a lot of big box retail type development, and I don't know that the market for that even exists in the same way it did 5 or 10 years ago. I think things have shifted.
And it might, you're right. And it might be great for sales tax, but it's not going to be good for employment.
It's not good jobs, and I don't know that it's even a viable pattern of development in Port Orchard at this point.
You do track your median wages or median household
The
incomes.
county wages, right?
Yeah, I think we were relying on a larger regional number there.
So, just to share with you, because I've kind of gone through this process over in Spokane on our initial 2000 and help me out here, 2002 adoption. And one of the things we were trying to figure out is the type of job, the skill level, and the wages and benefits that follow that skill level. Because frankly, under our then economic development plan, it was, and I say this respectfully, the community I love dearly, it was come to Spokane, wages are cheap. They were so cheap that we had deep pockets of poverty at $7.50, $8 an hour type jobs. And that's great, but you can't build a healthy community on $7, $8 an hour jobs, just adjusting for 10 years worth of economic data and inflation. So we decided to go after some land use, particularly around the old industrial area, but to smart it up with some technology and some medical and make it more of a university feel along the river, targeting the higher paying jobs. But to do that, we had to do some land use adjustments in the plan. And 10 years later, which seems like a long time when you're sitting here and looking forward to 2024, can you imagine that, 2025, they now have 1 million square feet of education, technology, healthcare, likely a new medical school, because not me, but because the community said we want to create a different expectation around the type of jobs we're trying to attract here. And my my sense is Port Orchard, where it sits as the county seat, very strategic position. Its proximity to the I-5 corridor being really the closest proximity. Those in Kingston will argue that it's really the Kingston Ferry, but you've got the closest, supply chain proximity to the I-5 corridor. There ought to be a way to leverage that, take advantage of that unique attribute and the type of jobs that will benefit from that proximity. Different conversation that they're going to have in Paulsbo, or different conversation they're going to have wherever. And then what jobs are best suited and supported and attracted to that geographic position, and the land use availability there, and the portfolio of improved, or the ability to develop the new. My gut tells me that over time, Port Orchard can be home to much more than 1% of its jobs being in the manufacturing sector.
The other thing that I just want to say at this point is when I look at the city of Port Orchard boundaries, I don't know how much room light manufacturing takes, but I personally want to be supportive of larger manufacturing and industrial at the Skia area. And I see that being a major employer for the citizens of Port Orchard. And I see Port Orchard more providing the goods and services to support the Skia project and the Department of Defense. Because again, when you look at our boundaries, not thinking all of South Kitsap, but just at the city of Port Orchard boundaries, what areas do we have that we could expand to do what you're talking about?
It is the ski area primarily, and I'm pleased to hear you say that the commercial activity doesn't necessarily have to be within your municipal city to benefit the citizens and raise the level of overall, prosperity and opportunity within your community, which is obviously being influenced in a big way right now by the shipyard.
Right.
So I guess one question that comes to mind, and we have a one-size-fits-all commercial zone that doesn't allow manufacturing uses, and I see the benefit of having one zone in terms of being easy to interpret and also, maybe more flexible, but, from an economic development standpoint, should we be more targeted in our approach to zoning, or should we be more broad?
We had this discussion when we talked about the centers, specifically, Bethel would be primarily retail, because that's what comes out of that, and Tremont would primarily be the medical, because it's already there. It's just an expansion of what's there. And then you go up North Tremont towards Sydney, and that's going to be mixed use, and that's where we talked about the artist lofts and maybe the brew pub types of things that could be mixed in there. And as we did that for all the different areas, it's going to kind of drive itself on what's available there. And I don't necessarily think, and I agree with you, I don't think we have the footprint within the city boundaries to carve out a $1 million square foot section of semiconductors or whatever else it's going to be, or medical college or what. I don't think we have that right now, and it's going to have to be Skia. And I think you're absolutely right, where Port Orchard then becomes the retail and services and bedroom communities support those jobs. Just
Right,
down
and the
road.
medical and that we that's what we take within the city of Port Orchard, and the idea of the medical community, I think, is very important, and perhaps seeing how we could get different educational opportunities in here. Maybe a tech school. I mean, I don't know, but there are things we could do.
And it's important because I think we just heard that Harrison Annex Tremont it's no longer 24 hours.
Yeah, they're making some changes.
They're making some changes to their hours of availability, which when I read that, I think in terms of there's not enough clientele to support a 24-hour urgent care operation, which we're going the wrong direction for providing services.
But that might be insurance related.
It could be.
Well, also ownership change.
And access to the Gig Harbor facilities, same system.
And in your health section, your medical healthcare section, would that also allow for labs and
Mhm.
light assembly of medical devices or?
And it should, and we had that discussion with the property not long ago, that we had
Yeah.
excluded labs and we needed not to do that.
Yeah, and we changed our business professional zone to accommodate that.
Right.
So, but anyway, yeah, so sort of the approach, I guess, of the plan is to look at each of these little clusters and figure out really what the needs of that particular cluster are. And that would be something that comes out of the comprehensive plan after the comprehensive plan is adopted. But to do just sub-area planning and really study those things in detail and come up with recommendations for how to make each one of those work and what investments are needed by the city in terms of infrastructure.
This particular document, when I read it though, focused so much on the downtown area that didn't feel good to me.
Well, it's interesting because in some respects, from a community character standpoint, kind of the attributes by its own name, Port Orchard, the waterfront, and all of that is a real defining characteristic.
Correct.
But the question is it the primary focus of your economic future? My sense is it will always play a very important role in it, but the job base, talked about yourself in your premise there, the job base and the type of jobs you look for are from my viewpoint, going to go far beyond what happens on Bay Street or the waterfront.
So Nick, what do you want from us on this document today?
Well, I guess, the things that I'm hearing, number one, we need to probably roll the center's approach into this element a little bit more than we've got, than it's set up currently. And then the other thing I think is, I guess we need guidance from you on, are there other goals that need to be addressed here or policies that are gonna lead to action by the city council to make economic development happen, and whether that's amending land use regulations for economic development purposes, what are there things that need to be streamlined? And one thing I think of is you could have a goal in here, and John, I don't know if you know this, but our downtown design guidelines require design review of every project that comes in. It's not just administrative guidelines that if you want to deviate from, you have to go before a board. You have to take every project you want to build downtown to a board for approval, and we've had 2 projects approved in 4 or 5 years of having this thing, and to me it seems to be a barrier to development downtown.
Yeah.
And so one goal would be streamline the design the design guideline process for the downtown overlay district. Another goal would be create development regulations that allow for a flexibility of low impact industrial uses in certain areas of the city and identify those areas. Or things like that can be put into this plan that are projects that we need to work on over subsequent years to implement.
But those ideas need to get into this
Those
plan.
ideas should be in here so that when we adopt those, we're adopting it to comply with our comprehensive plan or to further the goals of the comprehensive plan.
So any good plan starts with its objective. So primary objective of your economic development plan is to retain and grow your employment base. You want to be an employment center. Looks like front and center. That's one of the objectives. Then you have to assess your asset base. What do you have today that's supporting that objective? Is it being maximized, or do you have some liabilities you want to jettison, including policy and regs that could end up? Then, what's the strategy? What are the action items to build that balance sheet that will drive your objective? And that's the typical analysis of what your strengths are, your unique attributes, your competitiveness, and your challenges. And then at the end of the day, the fundamental question for me is, do you want dramatic change out of this update, or you just want to tinker around the edges and stay the course that you're on, and that's fine? And I don't know, but I think you need to put that question on the table.
I don't think that's for me to answer. That's for the citizens and for the policymakers.
Well, my even thought on that is do we have an investor that's willing to, make it happen quickly?
There's a new phraseology coming in development, it's the triple P. It's the public-private partnership. It's a jurisdiction collaborating with another jurisdiction or authority that has different powers or resources, and together with the private sector dollars, doing something that wouldn't otherwise get done. So, for instance, you already have a close relationship with the Port of Bremerton.
Correct.
Not only are they, within the city of Bremerton, but your immediate neighbor on the SKIA, now the Puget Sound Industrial Center - Bremerton, but you have a partnership and collaboration going on with the port along your waterfront with the marina and some of that access. So the question I might have is there more to make of that partnership? Is there more that they could do to support your employment base and you could do to support their objective? And one of the things that we discovered last year, searching high and low, is there is very little commercial industrial waterfront in this county, despite its 254 miles of shoreline outside the Department of Defense control. Because Safe Boats would love very much to consolidate their operation on our waterfront so they could be building big boats and their standard boat. Right now they're bifurcated between Tacoma and the Tide Flats for a big 80-foot boat they're building for the Navy, and most of their products still being built here out of the airport. So over time, I think everyone in the county that has waterfront that could be used or rezoned for more intense use for boat building or manufacturing could be well served. How that shakes out or where it shakes out, I don't know, but I can tell you, not just for Safe Boats, but I think for others that are looking at the Ship Canal over in Fremont and Ballard, Queejack Marine is a classic. They moved off the water to Auburn because they just couldn't take the price of the operations there anymore. So I think if Kitsap could present itself as having availability and friendly to that type of manufacturing, and if you look at Safe Boats, you go out there, it's not a heavy, dirty, terrible waste out the backyard kind of industry. And I'm not here to pitch just for manufacturers or industrial, but there's opportunities for the first community or area in Kitsap County that starts to develop more waterfront opportunity to lay up a 40-foot boat or a 60-foot boat and to launch it, test it, bring it back in. And some of these have to be delivered by water. That 80-footer isn't going to go on a truck. So, just a thought.
When I think of our waterfront within the city of Port Orchard, there isn't room.
Yes, there isn't.
Well,
There
there's
isn't room.
other than the car dealer or a couple of other areas that are pretty centrally located, which I don't know that that's where we'd want to put it.
Correct.
But I do know, and I don't think there's a zoning map up in here, but I think from the lighthouse going west of town, it's a mix of different zoning designations, and so there potentially is you could look at that particular area maybe as.
There's one area around Yachtfish, and just west of it, and then there's Parkway on the other side of the highway.
Right.
But you'd have to basically reroute the road to be able to draw in another 3.5 to 4 acres so that you had a waterfront site that wasn't interrupted. I mean, a lot of people looked at that when we were looking at the Safe Boats case and decided that the feasibility of rerouting that road was probably not very strong. So, the other thing that I think is unique from my viewpoint to Port Orchard, and I talk about it when I'm in front of the council, is your waterfront. And I just heard a realtor of yours give the history of Port Orchard. It was great out at the Chamber lunch a couple months ago. Right. It was a fascinating history. How you were position A in this community in many respects when the Department of Navy came looking for the shipyard, and your kind of juxtaposition across Sinclair Inlet from the shipyard, from my standpoint, is a huge asset. It is such a unique view, diverse view of, look at the shipyard and look at the Olympic range behind it. It's just a jaw-dropping position. And I know that probably influences some of the waterfront activities and development today, but the more you can leverage that and really use that as a calling card, I think that's a unique part of your brand in this region. I mean, think about if you were across the bay from the 777 line up in Everett, you know, just a short, what is this, 4 nautical miles, 5, whatever it is, and looking into that activity and then seeing the unbelievable natural beauty behind it as well. It's a great front window.
Nick, what do you want us to do?
Well, I think, I think that the committee that we're talking about forming probably needs to weigh in on this, because I don't want to have the three of you carry this, the burden of this sort of decision alone, without getting additional input. But it seems to me that, I don't know if we need to do even a second survey potentially and take some of these bigger questions back to the public and see what the public thinks of these ideas as well before talking about it with a broader committee that's planning commission and council. But I think, you know, we've gotten a lot of good suggestions today, and
Well, I invite you to work with us on that. You did a survey in the fall. We're doing a survey on behalf of the county with the caveat that the county includes 4 municipalities and special purpose districts. So all these questions are relevant whether you end up in an incorporated area or unincorporated but urban growth area, employment base if you would. Silverdale's certainly an employment base. But if there are key questions in your survey that you want another shot at,
gotcha.
that could, we're meeting with the county tomorrow to kind of finalize our list. Now, we can't do 50 questions.
Yeah.
We're going to try and have 10, maybe 12 type questions, but as part of our economic forecast conference coming up on the 28th of January, decision makers, there'll be 250 to 300 people in the room, and 2/3 of them in the business arena, if you would. It's a time for us to get input on some of the critical questions. So if there's something in your survey that could help us shape our survey, and maybe the questions are very similar, maybe already asked the ones we're going to ask. But
What's your deadline for getting the survey ready to go, and when will you have the results then?
we're meeting with the county on Wednesday, and we've got to be ready to pull the trigger on this and say, Friday, these are a set of questions, because we've got to develop the...
So by Friday, we would need to get you some questions?
So share with us, or I got to confess, if I saw the survey, I don't recall it, maybe I did. But if you have a copy of the survey and the results...
Yeah, let me share.
That would be great. That would be great. That's one of these instant smartphone surveys. Fred, you're going to like it. You'll be ready to go with your... Is that a Samsung?
No, it's the 6 Plus.
Oh, it's a 6.
I'm
Okay,
trying to look
okay.
for it to see if I can pull up that survey, but I probably can't.
So anyway, so we'll have the audience basically just dial into a phone number, and then you'll be online. And so, yeah.
All right.
I think that's important. And I wouldn't be surprised if
There's probably going to be a lot of overlap between what we...
Yeah, I can
Oh,
send you the questions that we're looking at right now.
Okay, that would be real helpful.
I think the question is whether or not the Port Orchard community wants manufacturing jobs within the city limits. Or this community may be perfectly fine with residential and service.
And we did ask about having some light industrial uses mixed into commercial, and there was support for that.
There was.
So,
Right,
I
and
think
that
once
was
you
light
define it,
industrial.
Yeah.
What I noticed on this first paragraph, or not first paragraph, but first page, you said the comprehensive plan promotes economic development by designating a diverse mix of appropriate range of commercial, office, and residential land uses, and there was no mention of industrial.
Yeah, I noticed that too, that sometimes in the goals, you'll say commercial, and then later industrial is addressed, so I
Okay.
would just always add.
and that
industrial.
was existing language, and so we...
Yeah, no,
we just updated
yeah.
that.
And you do have industrial within Port Orchard Park.
Yeah, yeah.
Although I would dub it mostly light.
Yeah, it's very
industrial.
light.
Yeah, it's all light, and you know, sometimes it's semantics, you know, in some people's minds, they still don't understand what today's manufacturing really is.
The number one call we get in the marketplace referrals from the Department of Commerce is a manufacturer looking for a 40,000 square foot facility. I mean, we probably get a dozen of those a year. And there's very little of that portfolio already built that's available in this county, which is the building in Omohundro, where we do 42,000 square feet, that Rick just happened to, on market, off market present it. But the port out at Skia at the Puget Sound Industrial Center is, it's got pads ready to go for someone that wants 20 or wants 40, but that is not as attractive as I've got it up, let me tour it tomorrow and see. So I think even the port is contemplating maybe putting up some spec stuff that you could evolve a 20,000 square foot to a 40 to beyond.
What's
But
our
that's all
Kmart?
leased, no sales there.
Yeah, what's our Kmart building?
Oh, it's like 60 or 70,000, I think, maybe 50.
It's big. You'd have to do a lot of demising in there, I think, maybe not, but my sense is that could be repurposed into light commercial.
Well, if they
Light
took,
or
if
light
they didn't
industrial, you mean?
take just the Kmart, but the whole around where the
Yeah.
restaurant used to be and
Yeah.
The grocery store is still operating in that plaza, isn't it?
No, it closed. That's going to be the Tractor Supply, right?
that's the Tractor
Oh,
Supply
okay.
place.
Good place for that. Well, that's compatible with,
Yeah.
yeah.
I had another thought in this, meant to say this earlier, but one thing that I've heard thrown around from time to time is in terms of helping Skia develop. Obviously, we have a ton of wastewater sewer capacity, and the city's ability to deliver that may be greater, at least initially, than the Bremerton sewer. And so, that
You're
might be
really
worth-
you're not just shovel ready, you're in the ground and flowing.
Well, we're in that part of town. We're a whole lot closer than Bremerton is at this point for providing sewer, and we don't have enough capacity to serve the entire thing, but we could certainly do it more cost effectively, at least for the initial.
Just in the
Initial
transport,
Well,
the energy
yeah,
transport.
this, because I know there's also been discussion of Belfair.
Yeah, and their Belfair is quite a bit farther than we are, but I think Belfair might actually have the potential to serve the entire thing, and so where we could only take a little piece of it, we could actually get it there cheaper than anything else, I think.
And Bethel has particular financial issues with
Belfair.
theirs. Belfair.
Yeah.
Yes,
North
they do.
Mason, that they probably really would.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, that might be worth exploring and
Yes.
as part of this, and as part of our sewer comprehensive plan update, which we're working on.
Yeah, you just have to make sure you change Skia.
To
Oh yeah, why did they make it so much harder?
Puget Sound Industrial Center dash Bremerton.
Oh, for God's sake. How about Fooey? Just call it Fooey.
Because in the regional world, Puget Sound, Seattle is a much bigger draw and driver for economic
Kitsap.
development than
South
Kitsap or Port
That's
Orchard
true.
or Bremerton.
They could have at least made it something that you could turn into a word.
The West
Yeah, it
Sound
was
or
so
something.
easy.
Could we call it West Sound? That's
I don't know if they talked about that or not. We weren't involved in, I wasn't involved in that.
West Puget Sound.
Yeah.
Okay, so, so that we can move on with our agenda, what are we doing with this?
I'm
now?
gonna work on the survey issue that's due this Friday to see if
Okay.
there's any other information we can gather that will be helpful. And then I'm gonna take some of the discussions that we've had today on specifically the centers and try to add some additional, sort of bulk this up. And I think we're gonna have a better idea of what a possible committee will look like by the time our next meeting would take place.
Exactly.
So this may go to another committee or it may come back here. We'll have to make
We'll
that
see what that
determination.
looks like, okay.
And the other thing that kind of really stood out at me is you've talked a couple of times about living wage. Will that be defined?
Yeah, definitely.
Living wage? Well, that's a tough thing to pin down.
Well, and people like to use living wage and family wage jobs interchangeably, and they're not
Yeah.
the same. And then on page 13, in that goal, you talk about industrial base, but it is not addressed in the policies.
Page 13, industrial base. Huh.
And then page 14, you talk about locally produced food, and there is a Kitsap Food Policy Council
Okay.
that you might be able to draw some things from.
Yeah, and back on that page 14 where you talk about, just this one, it says the city shall prioritize bicycle and pedestrian facility improvements that connect grocery stores with surrounding residential areas. And I thought, again, this is something the committee would work on, but I thought that needed to be expanded to healthcare and services and goods and not just grocery stores. And there was also something in here, and this is getting too much in the weeds for this meeting, but it indicated that we were not going to allow or encourage fast food in certain areas, and I thought that was, and we also had one that the city should support increased Kitsap Transit foot ferry service, and not addressing that we need a circular route through Port Orchard. So there was a lot of in the weed stuff here that I thought we needed working on.
You want to send me an email and just kind of restate those concerns?
Yeah, I
Okay,
will.
that would be helpful. Thank you.
I also suggest you substitute in the Puget Sound Industrial Center dash Bremerton.
Oh, you missed
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then I think when you're encouraging industrial use, I think you should call out the Port Orchard Business Park as well.
Okay.
That,
Because there
I
is-
mean, that's
there-
a nice park.
It's in your city limits, it's not encroaching on anything else, it still has some developable land in there. And there's probably some of the uses in there today that could be enhanced and
Right.
purpose, so
And-
that's a
And I would
general little
also,
part.
if you can work it in, sorry, John, how close you really are to the Port of Tacoma for exporters.
Okay.
Okay.
Because you have better access to Port Tacoma than some parts of Pierce County.
Oh, yeah.
So you should take advantage of it.
Okay, great. Okay, well, we're gonna take this back and revise, and we'll coordinate with you guys on the survey.
We really appreciate the invitation to come and spend some time again.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate it, John.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is really helpful.
Sue. All right.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Yes,
Right.
yes. If not before, on the 28th.
Yeah. Gonna be another good turnout, and John Mitchell, our economist, is half economist, half stand-up comic entertainer. He's always fun. And expecting a good crowd, and then we're gonna highlight some of the significant economic big play developments that occurred in the county this year. And then we'll go into the survey, and we'll outline comprehensive plans, how they impact economies, and then go through this instant survey, and hopefully it'll be beneficial for all of us.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
Okay.
Thanks, Kathy.
Lisa, nice to meet you.
See, Brandy's here. You're only here for item 5, is that right? Or,
And maybe 4. I'm
4
not
and
quite
5.
sure.
okay.
Do we want to move 4 and 5 up since Brandy's here?
I don't know. It's up to you. I just-
Actually, you don't need to. We can go ahead and go. Anything I wanted to do.
Okay.
So, thank you. All right.
Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you.
I had put the media kit on the agenda because we had discussed it a year ago, and I didn't bring,
60 pages each.
yeah, no, yeah, it is. The one for you, one for Fred, and I should have printed, I thought I did. I thought I printed 4, but maybe I didn't.
Here, Fred, I can share.
I did. There's another one. Let me go. What I just printed out was the basic outline that we put together for the LTAC request. And we were awarded LTAC money, so now we have a budget, I think, of maybe $3,800, $3,600, something in that area, to develop this media kit. And the reason I asked it to be put on the agenda today is just to kind of get an outline of how we're going to move it forward. I didn't know, because we have this $3,800 or $3,600, how we wanted to move forward creating the media kit. If that's something we were just going to task Brandy's department with, or whether we wanted, how we wanted to do that. Whether we wanted to hire a consultant, I don't know what we'll get for 3,800. We had just assumed that it would take about maybe 80 hours at $50 an hour to do this, and we had allowed $1,000 for photo supplies and other things, but which is how we came up with the 5,000, but we didn't get that full amount. So, Brandy, do you have any ideas or suggestions how we want to move forward with this?
I don't.
Do we want to work with Explore Port Orchard on it?
We could.
For input, maybe of what we want in it, or
I've heard that Visit Seattle has a really good media kit. I'm trying to pull it up now.
Yeah, I've heard that.
yes, we
maybe-
need to look at.
Maybe
We need
it
to
could
look
be
at right.
modified to an existing one. I know you bullet pointed a lot of stuff here, but
So, a lot of it's just gonna be just gathering data and putting it in, my office. I mean, we do newsletters, if you will, for the mayor, but I don't believe any of my staff is experts by any means by promoting and marketing materials or anything like that. We're more of a, gather the data, gather the documentations. We can give you the materials to put it into a final,
Into a
kit.
format that we can,
Right. And so when I look back at the RCWs, just to confirm the LTAC dollars, what can we use those LTAC dollars for? So anything that we seek reimbursement through the LTAC process has to be, it's very broad, tourism marketing. So, we're not gonna be able to recoup staff wages, if you will, but what does tourism marketing mean? Maybe if there's a final brochure that we wanna print up, we could probably use those. I'll probably seek some guidance from the auditor's office who monitors LTAC funds and say, hey, these are the type of things that we want to use for reimbursement. Can we use those? Just so that way, because it's a fine line, I just want to make sure that we use the money appropriately. So there's going to be more dollars expended than what was awarded from LTAC just because of staff time and things that we can't seek reimbursement for. But yeah, we can use Explore Port Orchard. We can use them, or we can coordinate with them. I just haven't had time to sit down and analyze this.
Right,
but-
no, I know
but
that.
yeah, absolutely.
what if we put something like this out for bid? I'm using all the wrong terms, but we told people this is the deliverable that we want. Do you want to give us a bid on, and maybe existing organizations can all bid on it, like maybe the chamber, or I don't, not the chamber, but ideally we'd want a PR agency or something like that, that might be able to do something like this. And if we've delineated what we want, I think it might be easier to get someone outside to do it.
That sounds like a personal services type of
Okay.
proposal, and you can select on price and qualification. And so
Okay.
you'd want to put out a request for proposal that included cost, and you could do that.
Because a lot of it is just, will come from Brandy's office, getting the information together. And then what we need someone else to do for us is to format it so that we can put it on the website, so that we can make the actual deliverable. But a lot of these things, there may be Explore Port Orchard or various organizations that can provide this information, help us get the data together.
It's data seeking is what it is.
Right.
There's two things, data seeking, and then is there a final end product that you're looking for, whether a brochure or multiple brochures. You'll probably even, under this, once we get everything that you want done, tourism promoting, marketing, you can use it as a tool. Maybe we purchase thumb drives or CDs for everybody, and that's what we use the LTAC funds for, is to purchase the deliverables.
I guess the one thing that comes to mind, and Fred, you mentioned hiring a company versus having Explore Port Orchard, which is, they're nonprofit, right? Or are they some
They're
kind
not
of?
a,
They're
not a-
not a,
They're not.
they're
They're
working
not
on
a, they're
it.
not a
Yeah.
corporation, or they're not a
correct.
Right.
LLC or anything. So you're talking about putting out a proposal that could go to a company which has a roster that we would select from versus going to a nonprofit, which we could probably, I'm not sure how you would go about contracting, but those are two different.
The nonprofit, or the reason I brought up Explore Port Orchard is some of the data we're looking for. They're going to have that
I
information.
don't think they would actually produce the.
They wouldn't
media
produce
kit.
no.
And you can always go out for an RFP and, you know, we have the right to deny it and not accept it, and, you know, we just wanna see what's out there, and if they come out at 10,000, then we're like, whoa, that's too much, but,
What really brought all of this to the forefront last year when we brought it before this committee is that there were people wanting to do things downtown, and they thought that the Kitsap Bank parking belonged to the port, and I mean, there was no place, we had no central device to give people the information that if they wanted an event downtown, how did you make that happen, and what were the resources that we had? And that was what was driving this whole thing.
in other cities, when I was going through the public event process and trying to figure out how to codify that or define, you know, just some
Right.
clarifying language. Other cities have, you know, they probably don't call it a media kit like we do, but I mean, they have defined applications and processes, and I mean, they have a whole pamphlet, if you will, that says, hey, these are our parks, our amenities that we have. They have all of that.
Right.
And so I think maybe that's what I envision this to be in conjunction with our public event process,
Exactly.
whatever it's called.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And we have a little bit of money to put this together. So the reason I put it on our agenda today is it does have to do with tourism, and that is part of our charge, and how did we want to move forward? So what I'm hearing is we'll use staff
I can
together.
gather some, by the next committee meeting, gather some other information to see what other, visit the Seattle page, you know,
Did
just
you
grab
have
some
one in mind that you've
materials.
seen?
No.
Okay, because it sounds like the audience is organizers and not visitors. You're not targeting end user
Could be
visitors.
either. That's
Or
probably,
both.
yeah,
Okay.
I think what we talked about before was, developers could also you know, what are your opportunities in your city, and it was, where do they go, the chamber, here, there?
Right. Yeah, that expands it a little
So-
bit from what I was thinking, but yes, exactly. And I was thinking more organizers than individuals.
Okay.
We had talked about having, you know, develop a yearly calendar of what weekends were available,
Yeah.
you know, all those kinds of things, so.
Because it's even like putting the banner up across the street, you know, who do you go for to do that?
Because for example, visitor resources, but that's not quite what we're going for. We're going something more basic.
To get the organizers to want to use this to
Right. And
promote.
it could be included in something like that.
Exactly. Okay. And then the other thing that I had talked to Brandy about and asked Nick to put on the agenda, I know it was just about a year ago, or it was first quarter last year, Brandy had a meeting with a lot of the nonprofits about the application process, and I know we were working on that, and I didn't know where we were or if we were going to move that forward or.
The last time an issue came up was the Irish thing or whatever next to the bird place or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I haven't touched it in a few months, so I have it back on my radar. We're gonna look at it, but some of the things that I think that we need to address in this committee is, you're not gonna be able to please the event organizers and the downtown businesses, and so the city has to make a decision on what type of events do they want, what property are they gonna allow the citizens to use, and what type of information do they want or approval, if you will, from the businesses. It's going to be a hard line. So I'm going back based on the Irish pub and making some red line versions of the ones that you guys have seen last. In addition, I have a draft red line version of comments that I received from that meeting that we had in the first quarter, as well as the fire department. I think there's some police department comments in here too. So I've got those incorporated, but I need to now go back and say, okay, how are we gonna accommodate the businesses that are affected downtown into this plan? And maybe we can't.
And
I don't know.
do we do something with using all of the parking? As an example, the cruise comes in on just a Sunday, and they take up absolutely all of the parking everywhere for their vehicles, and it's a wonderful event. The Mustangs, I believe, it's also a Sunday. I don't know that do they use all of the back parking?
Yeah, I remember they used.
It's getting more and more. It's not as,
Last
yeah.
time we were down there, it was huge. It was bigger than it ever been.
Now, I don't think it expands to Kitsap Bank parking, but it's to,
It starts just past that building.
yeah, all the way down, where the cruise has extended out. So I would suspect probably in a few years, they're probably gonna be where the cruise is at. And then we have some other events that are starting here, but could have the potential to expand like the
And I
cruise
know
as
that there
well.
was one event that I believe, but I think the application was modified because they wanted to take all of the parking and we said, no, you could take, because it was a new event.
That was lived right.
That was
Yeah.
yeah.
The Harley thing, right?
Yeah, we said you can only use this much because you can't take up all of our parking until the event is, and so those are policy decisions we need to make. Because can they do it?
Follow up from that event too, because what happened is they didn't have enough turnout, so they closed early, and then that made people angry because they had anticipated crowds coming and they'd opened accordingly. So you're right.
It wasn't successful.
No.
But it's my understanding they will be putting forth an application for, actually, I think they just did in December, yeah, they just changed their date. So they do have the event, and hopefully it's gone through the council process, been approved, they can do the advertising, they have a date in mind. It's my understanding it doesn't conflict with any other veteran activity that's going on, but you just don't know, it's still a little early. So maybe that could make it more successful, but.
Well, it's hard to know because we want to give new events the opportunity to grow, but on the other hand, if you're inconveniencing your restaurant sector, there has to be a better happy medium because he asked for a lot more than they needed.
Yeah.
And that's my concern. Those are policies that we need in place. And I didn't know why, if your workload had just got too great, but I know we're starting that time of year again, when all of the events are going to want to do something. And do we want to have an application fee? Because we put a lot of work into processing the application.
I think that was in the initial proposal, and then I think it came back that there wasn't gonna be a fee. Cause I did have the others anywhere from $25 to $100, other jurisdictions, so that can act, that's on the table as well.
And we had also, had there not been discussion at that of the events paying for police service?
Yes, that.
And
is-
public works?
Yeah, so there's already an ordinance that defines, and I did incorporate that into there. Right now, we have a standing resolution that it's $55 per hour for commissioned officers, reserve officers, and then I've added public works employees. So now I just have to go and define, because we haven't addressed public works, what does that entail? Does it include cleanup, just signs, just blockage of the streets? So I do have to include a definition of what public works is a paid service. So put that in there.
I think moving back from those details, I was concerned that, for example, with the Irish pub thing, that they were not required to tell any of their
Right.
neighbors that they were going to be closing on a Saturday.
And that's gonna have
And
to
that
be
was-
a council policy. Do you only want events on Sundays, or it doesn't affect?
Or do we
Transit,
require that they have to
or
get a letter from
park
each of the
streets, yeah.
adjacent properties or
Yeah.
something?
Or do we need someone, or do we have a process within the city that when we get an application, that it's
we
posted,
notify them?
that it's posted somewhere and the business
It's a
is.
step that's missing, and I don't know
Right.
that we can depend on the applicant to do it.
Right.
Correct.
And is that a
Unless-
policy that you now want staff to monitor? Because
Yeah.
this is the process right here that we currently use. And if we go into the public event process, where we we have to monitor and, okay, did everybody get, because right now what we're doing on a limited basis is we have to confirm with the Port of Bremerton that they've gotten permission to use their.
Right.
This doesn't make sense. So we already incorporate that. So are we taking it to the next level to say, hey, are we wanting, you know, the 5 businesses around? Is it the majority? You know, for
Right.
the publish, I just took the majority.
You have to do yeah.
You know, is it the simple
Well,
majority?
what if it's not, yeah, because
Yeah.
You
And then
can't-
if they don't have it, do we get that process before it goes to council? And a lot of times,
Oh.
they put in the application 2 weeks before
Yeah, it's
they
not
wanna have
enough
the
time.
event, and to
Yeah.
have it on a council,
Yeah.
it's
They-
crazy.
yeah, well, I think you need
So
more
do it
lead
at
time,
night,
number
yeah.
one.
There
but-
needs
and
to
I-
be more lead time.
And there needs to be clear-cut policies on, I guess, impacted businesses
And
or
road
entities
closures,
being
yeah.
able to shut something down before it even gets kicked off. You know, if, for example, the carnival wanted to come back downtown, you know, Kids At Transit, you say, hey, no problem, we'll move out of the transfer center and run a shuttle bus, you know, through the road closures and all of that. But if KT said no, you know, would that be enough to shut the whole event down?
And there needs to be, the applications need to be filed timely.
Yes.
So that there isn't, last minute.
Yeah.
Road closures for,
I think those.
it's
trigger
45
more.
days. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
the chief requires 45 days because that's what the state requires on the state,
On Bay Street, but
yeah.
what about the side streets? We should have something
Yeah,
similar.
there isn't a policy,
Yeah.
so, and I'll have to,
Maybe get 45.
I think we did 30 days in this proposed policy that they, let me just double check, it might be 60 days, I have to double check. But I'll, get this updated and sent out to you guys before, the next meeting, so you guys can take a look at it. I'll incorporate I'll look at other jurisdictions to see how they accommodate parking. They may not have parking issues, I don't know. But I can incorporate something in there. You guys can determine if you guys want an event fee, application. Some do, some don't. I'll list the jurisdictions that I found that charge and what the rates are.
I think you should have an application fee just to show seriousness of the
A lot of it's
organizer.
commitment.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, you pay $50 because, you know, this guarantees your date and we, you
They
know,
need to have
whatever
some
the
skin
rule
in the
is, and we'll
game.
define the fee.
In the in the circumstance that, I'm not gonna phrase this right, businesses being able to say yea or nay needs to be based on impact to the business.
Like a road closure.
And it can't have anything to do with the type of events.
Right.
Because then you're
Okay.
making judgments in there that I don't think are applicable for
Well,
anybody to make.
Okay.
I think, for example, we don't care, or they shouldn't have any say if someone's doing an event in their own place, in their own premises. But once
Their own
they
property,
start
yeah. And this
overlapping
doesn't adjust,
onto parking
accommodate for
or
any of
road
that.
closure, it's at that point that you need to get the neighborhood buy-in.
yeah,
or
if they're
they're
having,
affected.
if they're having an event
Yeah.
in their own facility
Yeah.
and they're using their own property, this whole code doesn't even apply. It
Oh,
only
so we
applies
don't-
if they're
okay.
using the city right away or city facilities. So which, you know, I haven't addressed any of this part, but it also could mean our parks, which that goes into that part of it. But what I'm using, what this space is for is our current events that we hold. And I did do a quick number, if you're interested right now, 2014, we did 28 events, in 2013, we did 31 events that went through the public event application
Right,
process that went
this
on the
is-
agenda for council approval.
The facility we have down on that waterfront really is an asset that we can take advantage of.
And you're gonna get more and more.
And we're going to get more and more, and that's why it's time that we have an easy or a defined process. This is how it works. And that's why I wanted to promote the media kit so that it's a little, all of it's more formalized.
You're gonna run out of weekends if you've already got 30 events planned.
Would, you know, one other thought on this, and going back to when we did our public art plan where we were just trying to identify the locations of public art, would creating a public event map of available things and then tying a schedule to it be
Yes,
helpful?
there was-
Media kit, yeah.
Yes, that
Yeah,
needs to
so-
go in the media kit.
Okay, but I was just talking about as far as process, so that you have
Oh, yes.
then in the code, if you're going to pass some sort of ordinance, you can say designated spots, and you can, you know, have that identified.
Right. And
And
again.
if it's not on there, don't even ask, kind of
Right.
thing. And that might
It's like our
simplify
temporary
that.
vendor.
Yeah.
But again, they need to know that that area is port, and that area is Kitsap Bank, and that, you know, so that,
And we do circulate, the cruise has a good one, and they define everything. They got the fire lanes, they got the sanitation cans, they have everything, and that's what we've been using to say, hey,
And that's-
use this
right.
as an example. This is what the council wants, this is what the department directors wanna see. And Clancy with the Hog Fest was the perfect example that came in and say, you know, here's the application, but there's no map. And it's like, this isn't gonna work.
is
but
he
here's what we
asking
have.
for 1 or 2 days?
I don't recall.
You don't remember? But that's one that I was concerned that they were going to ask for 2 days and that they were gonna ask for all the parking.
So another aspect of it too that was brought up that kind of put a halt on this was and I have to look into it more to see where, if it needs to be addressed in the city of Port Orchard, or maybe it was a total different situation, which is the University Place. They, I guess, went through an audit process and found that some of their events that the city was holding, for whatever reason, didn't justify,
Public funds.
public funds, right, yeah. So, and there were some liability issues as well, so, and some of it had to do with contracting out for services. They should have contracted out, or there was other, I don't know exactly, so I'm looking into that, and they actually had passed a resolution that says, hey, these are our city events, which we kind of did the opposite. We said, hey, these are events that we want to support at no charge. So that was the other thing, is I think this resolution needs to be updated and more defined and say, okay, this is the reason why we believe it is an economic improvement.
Stimulus, yeah.
And they did a good job outlining it. So I kind of want to do both together. Not that we want to steer away from any of these.
And we had a couple come before council last year and asked to be added to that list.
Yeah.
One was the Mustangs, I remember that.
And I did talk to Susan, and she said, you know, why, we've been here longer than the cruise, why weren't we implemented? And I went and looked at it, and I told her, I said, I believe you probably were not added on this is because you guys have never used or asked for police services.
Okay.
With the farmer's market or what?
No, this is with Mustang. So they've asked, and they've used street closures, but they've never needed extra enforcement from police officers, and I think that's what this whole thing was driven by.
Okay.
And maybe we need to relook at that to say, hey, because I do have the numbers for 2014, and with all of the events between Public Works, police, city events, non-city events, we're spending approximately $42,000 on staff support for those events. So, and maybe that's something you guys want to look at, but
Is
So-
it broken out by event?
it's not broken out by event, it's just broken out by, chimes and lights is separated, and then it's broken out by police, and public works.
And most of that's going to be fireworks in the parade,
Let's see.
or a good portion of it. will
June,
be.
July, August, January, February, June. It's a combination of events.
Okay.
I think they just code their time sheets anytime that they're working on an event, they code it. So I think it could be minimal. Some of them is anywhere from 2.5 hours to
But the
25
parade
hours.
takes a lot of police time,
Yeah.
and the fireworks is extra, and
Yeah.
those are the big ones that come
And
to
I think
mind.
there's 2 events that, in 2014 that we recouped some of that cost, and that is the Seagulls Flat Run. FASM's paid for the additional police officers, and the Jingle Bell Run they paid. And I'm not sure if there's any other ones. I think actually there was a third one.
That
It's
you
the
can
one-
do it?
Yeah, so there's a 4th one, and it's the new one that was annexed by Mitchell, and it's the county sheriff's office is a huge supporter of that event.
Oh, when they do the thing for the drunk
For the
driving before
map
prom?
and the car and all that?
No, it's where what is it called? It's the it's a car show, I believe, and it uses
Oh,
that.
at the Christian Life Center,
yes.
the car show, it's in end of August.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and that's one of the ones that took place years, but during the annexation, we received it. The cruise and car, truck, and bike show.
Yeah,
So they also pay for police support, I believe, as well.
okay.
So, but yeah, I will get this.
Okay, so we'll work on both those and bring information back to the next
Bring a
meeting.
draft, and you want a draft brought back to public properties or economic development, or do you want to just put it on one and carry over
Yeah, because it really,
both?
it goes on both, so,
Yeah.
since we're
Yeah.
the same,
I think public properties need to find which public properties they want to use, and then from
Right.
an economic standpoint, what do you want to promote and use? Okay. I think I got
Okay,
it.
thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Brandon.
Okay, and I believe I don't have any other items, so can I?
Good to go.
Thanks, Brady.
Thank you.
All right. Try to do these last two items quickly. First of all, I just wanted to share the final logo is done. We haven't gotten the user manual yet, but I did get that, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Is this good to give to somebody that would want to put it in an ad?
I think that council would want to authorize that because we don't have a policy in place for its use. And so if council wants to authorize it, I would just say, have.
I'll add it to tomorrow night's agenda.
Okay, yeah.
Unless,
Yeah,
you know,
right now
with-
we just have a JPEG of it, so if,
yeah, with your permission, because there are a couple of groups that are getting ready to put together materials, and I would like to see them use this logo in those materials. Pardon?
it's our mark
It's our
logo.
mark,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it.
So anyway, it's, right now we just have a basic JPEG. We're gonna get a bigger logo package as part of the deliverables, but
Right.
he wanted to go ahead and send this along in case there's any
Right.
need for it.
And is there a black and white version, or there will be?
There will be, it's gonna be part of the whole package.
Right.
So that's all I've got on that item. The last item is more, I guess, important. The KRCC Planning Directors meeting last week, we talked about possible amendments to the countywide planning policies as part of, over the next 4 or 5 months prior to Mary's departure from the KRCC. She wanted to clean up one issue. The primary issue the county needs to deal with, apparently they under-allocated Silverdale as part of for complying with the Vision 2040 growth strategy. And so they're needing to allocate more of the projected growth of the county into Silverdale. So they're planning on transferring some of the population growth, and so that's in the third column to the right, population growth. And those are the allocations for the next 20 years for each jurisdiction. They are planning on transferring some from Central Kitsap to Silverdale. At the same time, my discussions with the county said, is Port Orchard interested in seeing any change to the Port Orchard UGA or the city of Port Orchard? And number one, the county would actually be interested in taking some of the Port Orchard UGA population allocation and moving it to Silverdale, which I said, I don't know that the council wants to support taking something from South Kitsap and putting it in Central, because and we don't have control over the market, obviously, so what develops is
It's gonna
largely
develop.
market driven, but we don't want them to not plan for growth in South Kitsap. But I think the greater question is, would we be interested in having some of the growth? In the Port Orchard UGA, it's been allocated 6,235 additional residents for the 20-year planning policy, or the 20-year planning period. And so the question is, do we want to transfer some of that allocation to the city, given that the city has a surplus of population capacity? And so that potentially paves the way for the county to make some changes to the UGA boundary in the Port Orchard urban growth area. But right now, if you look at the buildable land analysis, the county has just enough land in the UGA to accommodate its population allocation for the UGA. So it's very hard for them to reduce it and still say we are complying with, or we're accommodating the allocation. So for instance, we have the critical areas off of Sydney that are in the county, and we've talked about possibly taking those out of the urban growth area because they're not very developable, and that reduces the total land amount that the county has, and therefore they have to find another place to put that growth. So my
Which
thought
means
on
they would
this,
have to do increased density?
they'd have to increase density or increase the boundary somewhere else. So it's a give and take kind of thing. So given that we have a surplus, my thought was we could probably take, whatever number the county wants to come up with. If they want to reduce the UGA by 1,000 and increase our allocation by 1,000 people, we could accommodate that without doing anything
Because
other
we
than
have like
changing the numbers.
3,900, don't we?
We have a surplus of 4,000.
The 4,000, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the question is, do we want them to do anything at all, or, should we leave it alone? But I was planning on bringing this forward to the city council for discussion at work study, because this would have to be, we'd have to notify the county really soon, like probably 10 days from now, if we're going to piggyback on the other amendment that's going through. I think that when you look at the ratio of allocation to capacity, I think Port Orchard has a much bigger surplus than the UGA, and those two things should probably be balanced out so that we are allocated, 80% of our capacity, and so that we're both sort of proportionate. But right now we have a huge surplus and they don't.
What are the pros and cons of doing it?
Really, like I said, growth is going to be market driven, and so I think the main pro is that the county has the flexibility to make adjustments to the urban growth area around the city. And so it possibly paves the way for some reductions in urban growth area around the outside of the city, but it still keeps we're still required to plan for just as many people. It's just going to be more compact and more, and compact development costs less for infrastructure and for providing services. So it's a way to make sure that everybody plans for the same number, but we do it in a smaller footprint.
And the cons?
The cons are, if you're an owner of property in the UGA and you're opposed to being taken out of the UGA, there's the risk the county would contract the UGA. But I don't know that they would do it for anybody who's not willing to go out of the UGA. But
Some property owners really appreciate being in the UGA, and some would prefer to be out of the UGA. But it's been brought to my attention recently that there's economic value to having your property within the UGA.
Well, there's also a liability, though, if you're not planning on developing your property.
Correct.
So somebody who plans to, own their property until the day that they die, they're going to be taxed at a higher rate because they're in the urban growth area than, somebody who is maybe thinking about selling their property in 5 years.
I like your first alternative from a controlling sprawl type of
Well, that's really it. Yeah.
sentiment, because I think with our UGA we are definitely.
And ultimately, that's going to be the county's decision on changing UGA boundaries is up to the county, and we need to negotiate with the county on what they ultimately do and have some buy-in on it. But I think that by reducing that allocation in the UGA, we give them the flexibility to make those kinds of decisions should they choose. And, I think that we can accommodate an extra 4,000 people without changing a single zoning regulation. I don't necessarily think we should be up against the upper limit of this thing,
That's
but
the 25,000 puts us over, and we start paying big more.
my thought would be, maybe we take in the vicinity of 2,000, and we'll let the county decide the ultimate number, and maybe council says not a number not to exceed this, but then give the county the ability to figure out what makes sense from a.
And I was thinking the same thing when you were saying 4,000. I was thinking we have 4,000 capacity, and saying we'll take 1,000. It seems to me I was thinking somewhere between 1 and 2 that we could take and not push our upper limit.
That's 4,000 in our current boundaries, not in our not.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. If you look at this number, you're doing nothing to this bottom 41,000.
Just move it.
You're just moving part of this 6,000 up to here.
And I know, and we have that 25,000 number that we're need to be
Right.
very aware of.
Right.
So my thought is,
No, it's a state agency.
if we bring this forward, I'll write up a memo for council work study, and council is just saying we could be supportive of transferring an allocation from the Port Orchard UGA to Port Orchard up to this number, and I'm going to just say 2,000 right now, and say that, but the county is ultimately the one that's filing the
Right.
amendment to the countywide planning policies, and so I'll let them then take the lead on it, but they'll know that we have bought in on that proposal. And so, if I understand it right, you guys probably don't want to see it go to Silverdale. You'd prefer to keep it in the south.
I would.
Yeah, I prefer to see it.
Okay, that's sort of what I assumed, and that's what I told them last week, but I wanted to verify. Okay, so that'll go forward next meeting, and that's all we've got on the agenda.
Okay.
All right.
I'm exhausted. This week is starting off with a bang. I got a lot of work to do.
I know. I know, but I really appreciate it. Thanks for inviting
Thank
John
you.
and Kathy here.
Yeah, that was nice.
And then when they turn these off.
Thank you, Lisa,
I
and
will.
I'll try to review those as soon as you have them ready, but emphasize public properties first, and also on the recording.
Almost exactly on time.